Okay, Dad, good day. Today is Friday, October 4th, and I want to start this conversation off by asking you some questions about Russia's involvement in the Middle East. I've heard reports that Israel actually struck a Russian base in Syria, that Netanyahu has been trying to call Putin, and Putin is refusing to accept any calls from Netanyahu. And also that Russia was shooting down Israeli missiles that were being fired into Lebanon from, I'm not exactly sure where they were shooting down from. Maybe you can tell me later. And also, there's this news about Russia and Iran signing a mutual defense contract within the coming week. So this seems like all quite big news. But first of all, can you tell me all these things I said are they true? Can you verify them?
Some of them, well, at least one is definitely not true. I heard that report about the strike on the Russian military base in Syria. Then it was later geolocated outside of the base. It was a city outside of the base that was hit. But it was close to the base. Um, Now, this report about the Israeli missiles being shot down by the Russians. I think it's supposed to have the interceptors were supposed to have been fired from some Russian ships. I just heard that report once. I haven't seen any confirmation. I have no idea if that's true. But actually, the Russians have supplied the Syrians with S-300 systems and other air defense systems. And, so the Syrians with Russian help have been shooting down a lot of Israeli missiles over the years. Um, yeah, I guess it would be a first if they was actually fired directly from a Russian ship, but it wouldn't be a huge change from the current situation. Now, yeah, about Putin calling, what I heard is, he attempted to call not Putin, but rather Netanyahu attempted to call Putin, and Putin refused to call. That's something that was news that was leaked by the Kremlin. I've heard that a couple of times. So I think that's likely true. And it would show, I think that's very significant. It shows the real, um, it shows really how far Israel's stock has fallen. It was at the beginning of this conflict, Russia actually tried to maintain kind of a neutral position. But as the carnage has continued, Russia has distanced itself increasingly from Israel and has become very hostile to Israel. Now, again, this is a real change. A few years ago, I believe it was just a few years ago, Netanyahu actually attended a Victory Day parade in Moscow. Now he's clearly persona non grata. It's very rare for the Russians to actually refuse a call from a foreign leader. And, it's a signal of very strong disapproval. So it just shows this is part, this is where it's talking about how this campaign in Gaza and now Lebanon has really hurt um, um, Israel's diplomatic position, its position within the international community. It's increasingly become a pariah, and this is probably one of the most striking examples of this. If Russia, before maintained, not warm relations, but maintained relations, try to again be neutral with respect to Israel, that's gone. And in general, the world has become very hostile to Israel. Israel has become, I think, as many have said correctly, the most hated country in the world.
Well, what about this mutual defense contract
Okay,
between
yeah, that's
Iran and
something
Russia?
that's, yeah, we knew that was coming. They've been talking about that for months. It's something that the Russians and the Iranians have been working on for quite a while, and they've scheduled a signing ceremony for roughly 3 weeks from now, this month. So that's, it's definitely on track. It's going to happen. Now we don't know the details of this pact that's going to be signed, but we'll find out. Again, it signals a increasing cooperation. A tightening of the relationship between Russia and Iran.
Right. And does Russia have ships in the area? And in the where are they located? I mean,
No, I
uh,
don't. Well, they do. They have a naval base actually on the Syrian coast. That's one of their few, bases really outside of Russia. So they don't have many ships, but they have a few.
Okay, well, with this defense contract that's going to be signed between Russia and Iran, we don't know the details of it yet, but I think it's significant. Plus the fact that Putin's refusing to talk to Netanyahu and their help aiding in defending Syrian airspace. Do you see this as potentially a catalyst into a greater conflict that would involve Russia as well, with on one side Russia and Iran, in Syria, and the U.S. and Israel on the other side, because that's quite terrifying.
Yeah. Well, there's always the risk of it. I mean, because Russia is present in Syria. It is a close ally of the Syrian government. It has a base there. I think it's clear that Russia wants to avoid entanglement in the war. Again, they do have their hands full in Ukraine. They don't need another front, and they don't want to, and it could easily spin out of control and become a war between Russia and the U.S. I think actually both the U.S. and Russia really want to avoid any kind of direct conflict. And in fact, they have, like in places like Syria, they have established deconfliction channels. There have been some incidents in the past. Russian soldiers have been killed, and I think maybe some Americans as well. And they have avoided, they've communicated with each other and have avoided, these incidents into growing into larger conflicts. So I think there's no question that the U.S. and Russia do not want to be drawn into this war. But again, the wild card is, as always, Netanyahu and his government. Israel's on a rampage, as we say, and who knows? It's just like he's constantly doing what he can, and he's now showing some success to create a wider war. It looks like we do have that on our hands. It looks like it's actually already begun, and he will do what he can because, again, he's reckless. He's frankly wicked. Has no concern for any lives outside of, his own and those of his own people. But he's also very smart. I mean, he's calculating, he's conniving, and he knows that he actually can't win this war. So clearly, the calculation is that he'll bring in the U.S. somehow. And he'll do it by whatever means. He's shown that he just has there are no limits to what he will do. And if his efforts so far fail to bring in the U.S., who knows what he could do, what he might try to pull off in Syria, and it may even involve the Russians. We just don't know.
Well, you say he's a smart man, but shouldn't if he's making these calculations, if he's aware that Putin is clearly is going to stand up to him, he won't even accept his calls, and this defense contract with Iran, shouldn't that act as a deterrent? I mean, because if we look at terms of proxy wars, you look what's happening in Ukraine. If we're talking about these great powers, the U.S. and Russia engaging in a proxy war, it seems clear that Russia has the upper hand. And especially if we're talking about in this region where, they share a continent with Russia. And we've been stretched thin in Ukraine. The NATO's been throwing everything they have, and we're running low on munitions, and everything's getting chewed up. Our weapon systems are being dismantled through electronic warfare and missile superiority from Russia. So if he's a smart man, do you think, is it possible that Netanyahu's like, okay, I can't get Russia to stand down or be on my side. Maybe I have to back down because this is also needs to play into his calculations, right?
Right. Yeah, I'm not saying that he is going to try to bring Russia in. I think probably that would not be to his advantage.
Or
right?
deter him from attacking Iran, I would say, just because of Russia's support to Iran.
Right.
Do you think that's possible?
Okay, you think it would? No. I mean, it seems clear that that's what he's bent on doing, right? He's very clever, but that doesn't mean that he can't miscalculate, can make a
he's
terrible
not very
miscalculation.
smart then.
Well,
you say he's smart.
Smart people do very stupid things, But it's just like, just like as in Ukraine, the West, NATO and the U.S. clearly miscalculated. They assumed that they had Russia on the ropes. They were going to, through the sanctions and through military support for the Ukrainian army, they were going to bring about the collapse of Russia. And it would result in the overthrow. This is something that they believed that they could do. And now they miscalculated badly. And I think that Netanyahu is doing something similar here. That he assumes that, again, there's also this, I think, this abiding faith in the power of the U.S., the sense on a lot of people within the U.S. and the U.S. allies that the U.S. power is unlimited. And now it's been shown to be a very serious error. I didn't think it was unlimited, but like before the Russian war, I thought that if surely, once things get, if this war comes underway, our military industrial complex will start churning out those weapons or whatever. It hasn't happened because it turns out that we have a really puny, military industrial complex. We have some showy weapons. Some of them are pretty effective, but we just can't make many of them. I'll give you an example. In this recent Iranian retaliation against Israel, the U.S. was involved in the air defense. They had 2 ships that fired a total of 12 SM-3 air defense missiles, very expensive missiles. And maybe some of them even hit their targets, Now, do you know how many?
Well,
we make 12 in a year. So that was a year's worth.
are you serious?
I am serious. We make a total of 12 in a year of these SM-3 missiles. So that's it. No more of these. So, it just tells you, and we already know what's happening. Like the Patriot interceptors are basically gone, and we can only make 550 in a year. And again, you need 2 for each incoming missile, and each one costs $4 million.
Yeah, it's unbelievable.
Yeah. So anyway, I think it's a very serious miscalculation on his part. Now, I mean, the pressure will be on again, especially if this escalates and it shows every indication that this conflict between Israel and Iran will continue to escalate. The pressure will be on as we go up the escalation ladder for the U.S. to become involved. I mean, there's going to be tremendous pressure within the U.S. to come to Israel's support, especially if it starts looking bad for Israel. And I think it will over time. And it's clearly something that the Pentagon does not want to do. They tried to avoid in the past. And they know, they have these sitting duck bases. And I think the Pentagon has come out and said recently, hey, we don't have many missiles. And I don't think people really believe them, or really just not getting through the thick skulls of the politicians. But
Netanyahu has to understand that a bit as well, because you say Netanyahu might be making a miscalculation like what we did with Ukraine.
Yeah.
Okay, with Ukraine, I understand. Nobody really knew Russia's capabilities. Nobody knew the extent of the rot in our own military-industrial complex and our lack of a manufacturing base to produce weaponry. So I understand. A lot of people, myself included, assumed different things would be differently. But now Netanyahu has the fortune of hindsight because of what we've seen in Ukraine. He knows. He should be able to see that this isn't working well. So
right.
How can he be miscalculating again?
Yeah. Well, again, I mean, he has this history of, he's been president for the better part of 20 years, and the U.S. has always done his bidding. They've always supplied him with what he's needed. And this, the recent war against Gaza, now Lebanon, all those 2,000-pound bombs or whatever, they just keep on coming and they keep on coming. And he sees the U.S. as a horn of plenty, and for it just kind of like an infinite. The supply seems to be infinite there. I think maybe the U.S. is making some noises about, hey, we can't give you so much of these anymore or whatever. But again, a lot of these politicians don't seem to really understand it or to believe it. And he just, and the neocons with whom Netanyahu's closely allied, they don't seem to understand it either. As part of being a neocon is having this faith in a kind of a a limitless U.S. military power. And that's a mistake on their part. But, they're clever people, but they do have this faith, I think, in U.S. power that's really blinded them to the realities. And it just seems like a lot of them aren't getting the message. We'll see. But I think that he doesn't fully understand, or he just refuses to hear the warnings. I'm sure that's like some of his own military is warning him about this, and he's getting warnings from the Pentagon, but he's not listening. He's always ignored them in the past, and things have worked out. See, this is one thing. You get a track record of always being proven right. It's like, I know I mentioned this at the beginning of World War II. A lot of Hitler's generals expressed doubts about, his plans to invade France, and they urged caution. And then he ignored them, and then, launched the Blitzkrieg attacks, and they were enormously successful. And it was just sort of like, yeah, I'm not listening to these guys. Now they started making some warnings about the Soviet Union, and he should have listened to them, but he didn't. He just thought, I trust these guys. They're always just a bunch of, they're cowards. They're too timid. We need a brave leader like myself who decisive. We got to go ahead and do this. And he should have listened to them. And maybe we're seeing something similar here.
Wild. So who's really in charge now in the U.S.? Because it seems like we were saying that, we don't want to see a larger conflict in the Middle East, but it just seems to be happening. Biden says one thing, and then another thing happens automatically. Israel just says, "Oh, we're doing our own thing." Actually, I have a clip I'd like to play for you that I think would fit well. You probably have seen this already. Let's try it. Okay. Here we go.
Just before Iran fired on Israel, I spoke with Lebanon's Foreign Minister, Abdullah Abu Habib, who's in Washington to meet with American officials, and he joined us for his first interview since the latest escalations. Foreign Minister, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Thank you.
Things have reached a major crisis in your country since we last spoke. And I want to ask you, you are in the United States right now. You know that several of the administration officials agree with Israel's, ground incursion into your country. What do you make of that as you're in Washington trying to get support for a ceasefire?
Well, they also agreed on the Biden Macron statement that calls for a ceasefire, and that calls also the implementation for 21 days ceasefire, and then Mr. Hochstein would go to Lebanon and negotiate a ceasefire. Okay, and they told us that Mr. Netanyahu agreed on this, and so we also got the agreement of Hezbollah on that. And you know what happened since then? That was the day we saw you in New York.
I know, and you were talking about going into the Security Council for this ceasefire, and barely 24 hours later, the head of Hezbollah was assassinated. Are you saying Hassan Nasrallah had agreed to a ceasefire just moments before he was assassinated?
He agreed, yes. We agreed completely. Lebanon agreed to ceasefire, but consulting with the Hezbollah, the speaker, Mr. Berri, consulted with Hezbollah, and we informed the Americans and the French that what happened. And they told us that Mr. Netanyahu also agreed on the statement that was issued by both presidents.
Okay, well, as you know, Mr. Netanyahu was also in New York at the time, and he actually said publicly the IDF must fight on. And then he ordered the assassination and the targeting of that headquarters, which killed Nasrallah. So, given all of that, I mean, who do you have any faith in if the strongest country in the world, the United States, seems to have no or very little influence after publicly saying that there would be a ceasefire?
I don't think we have an alternative.
Yeah.
Okay, that's wild, right?
Yeah, I saw that.
So there was a ceasefire agreement that the U.S. and apparently France as well were part of, and said that Netanyahu also agreed to the ceasefire, 21-day ceasefire. And then literally within 24 hours, they're both at the UN. This is PBS, if anybody's just listening, didn't see. That then within 24 hours, they assassinated right after they're saying that a ceasefire agreement was reached. Like, it's such a slap in the face. If there's any doubt that Israel is not trying to provoke a war, then this should settle it. And how does the U.S. take that? Like she said, that the U.S. seems to have no influence. That we gave our word, and a lot of people are saying that this is one of the reasons Nasrallah was assassinated, is because that there was a ceasefire agreement, so he wasn't in hiding as much, because it's there. They had the word of America and Europe, and they say Netanyahu as well. But literally, then Netanyahu, he has himself recorded a videotapes himself calling in the assassination to level these buildings in Beirut.
Right.
It's like he wants people to see that I'm here at the UN, and we just say that there's a ceasefire deal, and you can see me. I'm here at the UN, and I tell people that Israel wants peace, and this is what I'm doing.
Right.
It's such a slap in the face to America.
Right.
So I just who's in charge? Do you think America knew that this was going to happen? That America really thought there was a ceasefire? I mean,
well, I think it's probably the U.S. did what it did. In this case, what it did earlier in connection with Hamas. Remember when there were negotiations, ceasefire negotiations? There was at one point when the U.S. was claiming that Israel had agreed to. And they maintained that pretense for quite a while, but it was Netanyahu was going to say, "Oh no, we're not doing that." It was clear that it was some sort of I don't know, it's ridiculous strategy, or just sort of desperate desperation on the part of the U.S. negotiating team. So, well, let's just say that that the Israelis will do it, and we can rope them in, and if we say that the Israelis agree to it, then the other side will, and then we'll go back to Israel but Israel had clearly never agreed to it. And Netanyahu never had any attention, as we pointed out many times. And I think something similar may have happened in this case. They didn't really get any assurance from Israel. And if they had, if they were being at all honest or clear-eyed, they knew that they were not going to get it from Israel. But they just hoped against hope. Okay, we'll say that Israel did. Then we can say we have this agreement, and then maybe Israel really will go along with it. This is not the first time it's happened. I just want to point out too, it's just a further example, that it's clear, from this recent news and from, many earlier incidents that Israel has decided on a course of military conquest. They are not interested in any kind of diplomatic solution. When there were ceasefire negotiations ongoing over Gaza, they assassinated the chief negotiator, right? And now here, there's Dr. Nasrallah had agreed to a ceasefire. They assassinated him. And I also need to point out, it's just like it sounds like, we just killed this one man with a bullet. But of course, we took out at least 4 buildings, some say 6 buildings. We're talking about hundreds of civilians that died with him, along with members of his staff and members of his family. I think his daughter died with him too. Let's never forget that. This is a country that it's just as clear as day, has no interest in any sort of peaceful agreement with any country. Again, there have been attempts, obviously by Iran, by Hamas, and here by Hezbollah. Israel has run roughshod all over all of them. In each case, has chosen the path of military escalation, and that's why we're in the situation that we're in now.
It just still always blows my mind just how impotent and just neutered the United States is. That we can't. Our reputation is completely destroyed. We have no ability for diplomacy because we're just showing that we will say one thing and then it's clearly a lie. We have no control. we have no influence.
Right.
Like that's insane. That's insane. Like that you saying that our strategy was just to hope. Like we never really got Israel's word. Like we could get Israel's word if we say, hey, Israel, if you don't do this, then we're going to not give you any weapons. So,
right. That's exactly. It's just Netanyahu's learned. He can just completely ignore him. He just blows them off. It's happened again and again and again, and it's amazing how these countries. I have to say, I'm very sympathetic with Pezeshkian, the new Iranian president. He's been excoriated for being a fool or whatever, but he tried the path of peace. Again, I think he was quite naive. And now he's woken up to what's happened. But it's just like even after all that had happened to Iran, they were still hoping. Okay, it's hope against hope that we can work something out.
Right, that maybe that the U.S., we can talk with the U.S. and the U.S. is able to exert its influence over Israel because the U.S. does have the power, does have the ability to stop this. We've talked about this many times. So it just seems like I can see where possession's coming from. If anybody's dealing with it, it's like, okay, well, the U.S. is reasonable and they're the great power. They're the ones that are really in charge. So we make that agreement with them, then it should be their word, should be their bond. But clearly it isn't at all. Yeah. And that's unbelievable. And it's just so damaging to the United States on a global stage.
Everybody sees it, like especially the countries in the region. You say, like, who's going to, the U.S. credibility is just nil right now. The U.S. reputation is in tatters. This is a diplomatic disaster.
Mm-hmm. Nobody's going to trust us again, and they shouldn't. They shouldn't. We've shown again and again. I mean, we can go back long, as far as we want back, how the U.S. has gone, hasn't held up its word, has gone back against its deals and its promises. In Ukraine as well with the Minsk agreements and all these. But it's so blatant now. It's so in your face here that it's unbelievable that we just take it. We just go along with like, oh, well, Israel, he's just, he's crazy, but.
Right. Yeah, it's a combination of, I think clearly there are people in the U.S. administration that do not like what Israel's doing. We got that report from, about Lloyd Austin shouting on the phone. And you hear apparently there's real intense animosity now between Biden and Netanyahu. But, there are two things going on. That's just like, even the ones that, I think Biden, no matter what, would be supporting Israel. He personally hates Netanyahu, but he's just a zealous, a fervent Zionist, and he'll continue to supply the arms to the very end. Others, I think, really would like to change their policy, but they're afraid. They know the power of the Israel lobby in the U.S. They know what it means, and so they just shut up. They're quiet, and they do what they're told. But then also you do have Netanyahu does have his supporters, quite a few of them, within the U.S. administration, and you do. Especially the current time where there's nobody really in charge, a lot of them are, I'm sure, are just personally, like probably Blinken, just reassuring Netanyahu, just don't worry, what Biden says, it doesn't matter, or what, if Lloyd Austin's angry, it doesn't matter, we've got your back, nothing's changed here.
Right. Yeah, no, it's very fascinating. I mean, it's an insane state of affairs with the United States that there doesn't seem to be anybody in charge. So you have this question of like, can you even deal with the U.S. at all? Because there really isn't anybody to talk to. Mm-hmm. Because if you do talk to one person, they may not want to do that. But apparently there are other forces in the government that just do what they want to do. So, yeah, I mean, is it fair to say that the U.S. right now, it's there's just different factions within the U.S. that are each kind of pursuing their own interests, and even those interests may conflict. For an example, there was this report. Well, I mean, obviously the ceasefire deal with Lebanon. There's a report that that we're trying to de-escalate the situation, tell Israel don't go into Lebanon. We have the ceasefire, but then I also heard a report that we secretly told Israel you need to go in now. This is the time to move in. Have you heard that as well? So
I've
it's
heard
like,
that. Yeah. Again, who knows what's true? I mean, these things are probably leaked by intelligence agencies with they have their motives. But it's possible that both are true, as he's saying. It's just, again, we have a rudderless government, and there are factions. Like, everybody they're virtually all Zionists. But some of them are, let's say, are
pragmatic.
Yeah, it's more pragmatic Zionists, as opposed to the wild-eyed Zionists that just want to go for an all-out war right now, who really do want a war with Iran, and they've always been there, right? So, they might both be true, both of those reports.
That's crazy. So you think that's the current state of the U.S. government? We're rudderless. There are individual different factions. The State Department wants to do this. The neocon group wants to do this. The Pentagon wants to do this. And nobody's making any real decisions. And they all kind of just do what they want to do.
Yeah. In the end, though, it almost doesn't matter, because when it comes to Israel, it's Netanyahu who calls the shots. He gets his angry calls, he gets his warnings or whatever, but he ignores them, and he goes ahead. And no matter what, as we see again and again, we saw it with Lloyd Austin, the U.S. falls in line. Even if they didn't want him to do it, if he does it, they make some statement, we stand behind Israel, every time. And then they send him another shipment of bombs.
So would it be fair to say that the real commander-in-chief of the United States military is Netanyahu? It's not Biden?
Well, you could almost say that. I mean, that's a bit of a stretch, but he's not actually he's not commander-in-chief. He's not actually, instructing, or ordering deployments or anything like that. That would make him a commander-in-chief. But he's basically setting policy for us and strategy, let's say, at that level. Yeah, it's actually, he's driving the strategy, and not the U.S.
That's insane.
Yeah.
It's really crazy. So do you think then, if after everything that's done, and it's clear that, I showed you the video clip, that Netanyahu is just escalating, is wanting to drag the U.S. into war, and apparently Biden has no ability to say no. So do you think then that when there is a retaliation on Iran that Israel has promised, that it'll be done potentially with the United States, that the United States is going to strike Iran or help Israel in some capacity?
Yeah, I think the administration's already stated that they will not participate in an attack. Now, I guess you can take that with a grain of salt. I don't think if they participate, it'll be kind of indirectly or behind the scenes, like maybe providing them with satellite data. I suspect they're doing that. Maybe refueling services, which is, that is a clearly participation, but they're not going to be. I don't see any like U.S. aircraft, U.S. missiles being fired at Iran, not at this stage. But again, they'll take when it seems almost inevitable at this point, Iran launches its next attack. Again, the U.S. will play an air defense role, but it seems like from this first attack that's rather ineffective, and they have even fewer missiles to use this time.
Right, we'd have to, wait another 10 years to build up enough interceptors to survive the next barrage. It's a crazy state of affairs. I just can't believe that the U.S. is just has no ability, and that we are just drifting into this war.
Yeah,
It's
right. It's almost like some kind of bad dream. It's hard to believe, but this is where we are.
You think that maybe at some point somebody's going to wake up, or Biden's going to wake up and say, hey, we can't do this, that he's just been
Well, the thing is, even if he all of a sudden magically got his cognitive powers back, he would still be, I don't think there would be any change, to be honest. There would be maybe a little less chaos, but he's going to support them. He might, again, make the occasional angry phone call, but it's in a gesture of disapproval. But that's, he's supported them all along, and he will continue to support him. And it looks like it doesn't matter if it's Harris or Trump, that support will continue with the next administration.
Right. Well, do you think that there's any hope with a Trump administration that things could potentially just de-escalate? I know Trump is a fervent Zionist, and
Right.
they seem both that all of our politicians try to out-Zionist each other, but Trump does have a history of talking to adversaries.
Right.
Talk to Kim
Right.
Jong-un. So
Yeah,
at least there could be some dialogue. But
Yeah.
the bar is just so low.
I know
that it's just like,
I think actually, Trump is more of a wild card. There is I don't think it's likely, but there is a chance, as you say, that he could. And I think actually Ambassador Chas Freeman says this too. He's no fan of Trump's, but he said, he saw what happened in North Korea, and he just said, okay, I'm going to talk to this guy. And, that resulted in all kinds of howls of outrage. How can you talk to a dictator, et cetera, et cetera? But he could do the same with Iran. He actually could. One thing I think it was just yesterday, I was watching a clip of a recent interview, and I think it was about the Soleimani assassination and then the response. And I was struck by the way he talked about Iran. I think, the Soleimani assassination was horrible. It was thuggish. It was evil. It was unwarranted. That's blood on his hands. But he was talking about the response. He said, okay, we got this message. They told us they're going to respond. They're going to strike at these bases, but they were not going to injure our soldiers. And they struck, with great precision. And he admitted all of that. But he said, and I understood, he said, I understood that's something I had to do. And it's just something that you would actually never hear come out of the mouths of somebody like Biden or Harris or whatever. It's just that he actually understood that, okay, the other side are human. He's decided that they're enemy for some reason. He's been convinced of this. But he actually seemed to regard them as having their own interests. And he could actually showed in some kind of ability of putting, himself in their shoes. And I've never heard that, to be honest, from the Democrats. It's just like they're evil, and they just and if you talk to them, that proves that you're somehow, appeasing evil. And so I think there's at least a potential, a chance. Again, a small chance that actually Trump could do something surprising and actually extend an olive branch.
Trump changes his mind, quickly.
Yeah.
We know that.
Yeah.
And I think he's very influenced by people he talks to. And so if we can just talk to Pezeshkian, if you hear the Iranian president, or I heard the vice president of Iran as well, they're so polite, calm, respectful. Just, if we can just hear them and talk to them, then all of a sudden they become human again. And then that's the first step. Let's just realize that these are real people. And they don't want to die, and they don't want bloodshed. So let's just start talking, and we can find a solution. Just keep on talking, and I have a little glimmer of hope in that sense. But if we just refuse to even pick up the phone and call, and Biden, I just don't know how much, if he's even capable of it. He doesn't want to, and it seems like Anthony Blinken just doesn't believe in diplomacy. He just doesn't want to talk to anybody.
No,
it's absurd. It's a crazy state of affairs.
Right. It's quite extraordinary.
Okay, well, let's pivot a little bit. We'll stay in the Middle East, but I want to talk about updates on this Israeli incursion into Southern Lebanon, their invasion. So I've been seeing some, that there's been ambushes. Can you kind of give us just sort of a war report on what's happening there?
Okay. Well, it's hard to know, but it's clearly not going very well for the Israelis. The Israelis are not reporting much, but they've admitted to 10 fatalities among their soldiers. Hezbollah is saying it's quite a few more than that. And it's not going well because, in fact, you would be getting triumphalist reports from the Israelis if they were making real progress. From what I've heard is they've done, they've barely penetrated, and they've been, immediately found themselves in subject to ambushes and booby traps, and it seems like it's what we were predicting is taking place. Hezbollah is well prepared and has the advantage in the situation. It looks like a repeat of 2006.
So But what do you think is going to happen? Are they going to try to pull out? Are they going to double down? I see that there's
Yeah.
more bombing raids, but bombing raids are going to destroy
Yeah.
Hezbollah. It's going to
Right.
strengthen the resolve of everything, turn more
Right.
hatred towards Israel. So,
Right. Yeah. Well, there's who knows? But here are two possibilities. Is one, as several people pointed out, the Israelis declared ahead of time that this was a limited incursion, and they had some sort of limited objective. Now, at the same time, they're warning all the residents of Southern Lebanon to all the way up to the Litani River to evacuate. So that does not seem like a limited incursion, but they officially stated that it's a limited incursion, and as several people pointed out, that allows them to save face if they fail, which appears to be what's happening. Is they attempt this, it doesn't work out, they'll just say, okay, we destroyed an important base, near the border, success, mission accomplished, and just pull back and say, that's all we really wanted to do. And, that's maybe what they'll do. Now, I fear that, as Chas Freeman said, that they may just take the Gaza approach if that's what happens, to say, okay, well, yeah, hey, it's too tough fighting these guys on the ground. Let's just go back to the air where we can, where our power is unchallenged, and just pulverize Southern Lebanon. We'll give it the Gaza treatment, and then there's nothing left. We'll just move in. But even then, it's like the Hezbollah's underground. They can still is still going to be a very tough fight. So I don't know what they're doing. It seems like this was it seems to me, again, maybe things will change over time, but it seems to me that they made a severe miscalculation, and perhaps their initial successes, in decapitating Hezbollah in gave them overconfidence, and they're now suffering the consequences of that.
have we seen any types of larger rocket attacks or anything coming from Hezbollah or the Houthis
there have continued to be rocket attacks. Actually, a lot of them directed, from what I understand, at troop concentrations close to the border. Again, military targets. The scale of attacks has gone way down. I guess that makes sense. It's just like the Iranians showed what they can do, and they can obviously do a lot more than what Hezbollah can do.
Why do you think Hezbollah is holding back on its rocket attacks? If it's
doesn't seem just like they don't really have any need to do it right now. I mean, they want to keep their powder dry they make sure that if at some point it becomes really, it becomes necessary, or becomes to their advantage, they will. But I think at this point they're just focusing on the ground war where it's taking place, and their occasional rocket attacks are made in support of their ground effort.
Do you think an Israeli retaliation is inevitable? That they will for sure strike some Iran?
Yeah, because they have come out and made very strong statements and assured that that it will happen.
Right.
And it's going to be a harsh response, and it will be a major blow to Israeli prestige if they don't respond in a major way.
Right. Well, I mean, Iran stood down after they promised retaliation to the assassination of Ismail Haniyeh. It went for 2 months.
Right.
We now know why, because there was an agreement made with the Americans.
Right, who promised that they were going to work out a ceasefire. Exactly. But I don't. There's not going to be anything similar in the case of Israel. There's nothing to restrain them. They don't show any restraint.
So then, if this retaliation, this strike on Iran is coming, we don't know when.
I think it's almost certain. If it doesn't come, it shows that
Israel lost, basically.
Yeah, that Israel lost. It's just like the IDF and maybe the Pentagon just actually managed to convince Netanyahu that don't do this. They've got the advantage here, and maybe they're looking. One thing that's happened, of course, over the last couple of months is, we're pretty sure anyway, the Russians have moved in and provided, air defense technology, and it's going to make any kind of retaliation that much more difficult. Again, Iran's a very large country, so there's no way that the whole country can be covered by air defense, but they can defend a lot of the strategic points.
Yeah, these key assets. That was going to be my next question: is what do you think this retaliation will be? What will they strike?
Yeah. Well, there was initially talk about striking nuclear facilities in Iran, and then the U.S. openly advised against that.
Yeah, I saw Biden saying it himself.
Right. Again, what does that mean? I mean, maybe they're saying that in public. It doesn't matter anyway. Israel will do what they'll do. And then there was talk about actually striking oil and gas facilities in Iran. And Biden is there saying, they could do that if they want. And it's just like, what? This is obviously not going to help your reelection efforts. This is going to send, oil prices through the roof. So it seems absurd to me. And
so that's what I've been hearing as well, that the idea is to strike energy infrastructure, the nuclear plants and these oil fields, not actually necessarily military military bases.
Yeah. Well, again, talk is talk, and maybe this is all misdirection. But if it's true, and perhaps it's a recognition that the military assets there in Iran are just too strongly defended.
But then these energy infrastructure places like nuclear power plants, they have to be quite well.
You would think
so.
You would think so. Yeah.
Is a strike on a nuclear power plant, is that how big of a move is that? Is that just something that would just get international condemnation? Would it cause a nuclear disaster?
Yeah, well, I believe that these facilities are very strongly protected because they have long been threatened by Israel, and Iran has responded, that they have prepared for an attack over the course of many years. So some of them, at least, are deep underground. Now, of course, Israel has these bunker busters, but I don't think they can't just fly over the targets like they do in Lebanon, where where they have air supremacy. They would have to fire from a distance, and I don't think you can send a 2,000 bunker buster bomb from any great distance. I think you have to be more or less overhead to strike the target. I don't know what they can do. I'm sure they can damage some of the facilities, but they wouldn't be able to destroy the Iran's nuclear. Well, its whole, its entire nuclear network of facilities.
Okay, I know you hate when I do things like this, but when do you think we should expect retaliation? Do you think it would be soon, within this month, that Israel would go fast? They can't wait too long, because we were saying that with Ismail Haniyeh, but obviously we know why that took so long. It never happened. But.
Well, again, it's just like Israel is the party that really wants war. So I think we are going to see it rather soon. And if it's taking a while, it shows that they're actually having trouble figuring out some sort of
That's what I was going to say. Like, maybe they're finding they can't, how will they strike it, because they may not have the capability unless they're trying with, a Jericho 2 or 3 ballistic missiles. But like we said, those are just kind of a one and done. You can fire a handful. They're not able to do a barrage, a volley like Iran did.
Right.
So do you think that's probably what it is they can't, they're delaying because they need to make...
It's too early to call it a delay. It's just been a few days, right?
Right.
We're talking about 4 days. But yeah, if it goes on for another week or two, then it certainly suggests that they are struggling, that they're...
But because Israel, we've talked about this before, their power, they need to project dominance, right? They need to maintain that deterrent capability. So I feel like whatever they do, they're putting a lot of pressure on themselves that it has to be big. But then it's the problem is, are they even able to do something really big without being just, dropping a nuke? That's too big. So
Right. Certainly at this stage, right? Well, it's too big in any case, but it might come to that, as we're saying.
Okay. All right. Well, I don't know. Is there anything else that I'm missing that you'd like to update us on the Middle East?
I thought one thing, I talk a little bit about the effects of the strike that Iran carried out. I mean, there was a question about how much damage was done, and there's still quite a few unknowns. But it's clear that they actually did hit the Mossad building in Tel Aviv. I remember seeing the video of that. It was clear that they struck a building right there and did a great deal of damage. And it was a Nevatim air base in the Negev desert. It was, finally we have the satellite images, and you can see 32 strikes. Now, initially it was said, well, it looks like they just got a couple of, one did some severe damage to a hangar, where actually F-35s are kept. And then I think a couple of other facilities were hit, but it looks like the rest of them were scattershot. And then we got more precise images, and we saw that actually a number of bunkers were hit very precisely. Bunkers where fighter aircraft, including F-35s, are kept. Now it's assumed, I've seen a lot of people say, well, clearly, they since they had warning, at least a couple hours, we were getting news that the strike was imminent. Just a couple hours before it happened, they got the F-35s out of there and up in the air, because that's what you do. Like it's when your air bases are threatened, you don't leave the aircraft on the ground where they're vulnerable. But this was pointed out by Eve Smith at Naked Capitalism. Actually, I think she was quoting another American military source. The F-35s have such a terrible maintenance record that fewer than 50% of them are operational at any time. So it's maybe a strike's coming, but you can't get more than half of your F-35s are going to be on the ground, no matter what. And an illustration of this fact was the recent hurricane, that struck the Carolinas here. There's an American air base there, and a third of the F-35s were damaged by the hurricane. Why? Because they couldn't get most of their F-35s out of the way. They had a couple days warning, and they couldn't. So I know on the day of the strike, Iran claimed that they had destroyed 20 F-35s. Israel said that none were damaged. And I tended to believe Israel in this case, because I was thinking, well, obviously got them up in the air. But, maybe the Iranians are right. Maybe it wasn't 20, but I think it's highly likely that in light of the recent satellite photos and the fact of F-35 maintenance problems, that at least some of them were destroyed or severely damaged.
We know how big Israel's Air Force is. Like, how big of a blow would it be if they lost 10 to 20 F-35s?
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it's a very large Air Force for a country of its size. But if they lost 20, that would obviously be a major blow. Yeah, I think that's where most of them were stationed. I don't know what the total number is. I'll look that up afterwards. You can find out.
Okay. Yeah, that's an interesting point. Yeah, I also heard that too, that they would be taken up in the air. But I did hear that, maybe there might be some maintenance, but to hear that maybe 50% of them potentially being maintenance.
I had heard that actually months ago. That's just they're very costly to begin with. Each one of those planes cost $100 million to make, and then they're very expensive to maintain, and both in terms of time and money. They're so, yeah, they're great when you're carpet bombing defenseless people, but they're not so great when you're against a peer or near peer adversary.
Okay. All right, Dad. Well, I think we'll end it a little bit earlier today.
Okay.
But thanks a lot. Have a good weekend, and good weekend to everybody that is listening.